Bonjour à tous. Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about le passé composé. So first off, I want to review passé composé avoir, and then we are going to talk about passé composé être. So for some of you, this might be a bit of review, but for others, this is all new. So I just want to start and make sure that we're all on the same page. So I'm going to quickly change my paper here from passé composé être to le passé composé avoir. So, passé composé avoir, c'est très facile. It's actually pretty easy once you get the hang of it. But we're going to go ahead and start off with the famous steps. So, I've got my steps drawn. So, première étape, the first step you need is avoir. It's in the name, so it should be pretty easy to remember. So the first thing that you need is for the passé composé is avoir. And by avoir, I mean that you need that irregular favorite verb of ours conjugated in the present tense. So I'm going to just write present tense here. So that way we don't forget. So present tense. So we're going to conjugate it like j'ai, tu as, il, elle, on a. Nous avons, vous avez, and ils ont. So you need one of these plus something else that we're going to talk about here. But you first need to start off with one of these before you can even go anywhere. The second step to passé composé avoir, so la deuxième étape, that second step is going to be your past participle. And by past participle, we usually call it the PP. So past participle is that did or that thing that ends in ED in English. So that might help you keep it straight. That's the ED in English. Now, with the passé composé, with your past participles, there are a couple irregular ones. We can get into those later on, but I just want to make sure that we have a good basis of this before we start talking about the passé composé être, because we're going to need to add on another step. So basic endings in passé composé, if your verb ends in ER, it's going to change to accent aigu. If your verb ends in IR, it's going to change to E. And if your verb ends in RE, it's going to change to U. So, big generalization of verbs in French with the passé composé. If it's going to end in one of these three, but it's going to end in these in the past participle. So in order to make the passé composé avoir, you need one of these plus your ending in this for your other verb. Now we can talk about the irregulars later on, but I'm just going to put a little star here. Careful. Attention. There are irregulars. All right, and so we talked about those earlier on when we actually went through and learned the passé composé. But for right now, for time's sake, I'm just going to give you guys a generalization. All right, let's do un exemple. So I'm going to take away my paper here so we can do un exemple. And then at the top, I'm just going to write PC for passé composé and then avoir. All right, so as we remember, there are two steps. It's always helpful to draw our staircase. So there are two steps. That first one is avoir, and then your second one is your PP, your past participle. So if I wanted to say, I talked to Madame yesterday. Right? This yesterday is our clue to tell us that this is in the past tense, right? Because you can't talk to Madame yesterday if you're talking to her today. So to say I talked to Madame yesterday, we first need to bring down our subject, and that's going to be je. However, this talked is the past tense in English, but I need two steps in French. So that first step is going to be my avoir, so I'm going to get rid of my E, add an apostrophe, and it's going to be AI, so that's step number one. So j'ai, I had. Now we need this talked. So talk in French, or to talk in French, is parler. So that is the verb parler, which is an er verb. And we should remember that er verbs are going to end in accent aigu. So I'm going to just take off my r and add an accent aigu. So j'ai parlé, I had talked, or I talked. A is to. Madame, I'm going to abbreviate that. Hier, yesterday. So hopefully you can see now I've got my step 1 and my step 2. Let's do un exemple. Let's do another example. So that was exemple numéro 1. Exemple numéro 2. Let's say that he finished his homework. He finished his homework. He's a good student. All right, so he finished his homework. This is my past participle in English, but remember in French I need 2 steps, right? In English we can really just say he finished, but in French I need to say he had finished. So I'm going to bring my subject down, il. Now I need my avoir, so a. And now I need finished. Finished, the verb to finish in French is finir. It's an IR verb. We should remember that IR verbs change to just an I. So, il a fini. Son is his. And then devoir. So I've got my step 1 and I've got step 2 right there. Hopefully this is a good review of passé, composé, avoir. So with that being said, let me change out my paper and get my passé, composé, être back. So now let's talk about passé, composé, être. Just like with the passé, composé, avoir, there are a couple steps. However, there are now 3 steps. So I'm going to just draw my staircase with 3 steps. Obviously, that first step is going to change because we're not talking about avoir anymore, but instead we're talking about être. So our first step is still going to be that helping verb, that auxiliaire, that auxiliary verb, but instead of it being avoir, it's going to be être. Again, in the present. So I'm going to just write present so that we don't forget that. Again, in the present. So now let's go through and conjugate être. It's a good review of some good French 1 verbs. So to say I am, we say je suis, and then tu es, il, elle, on est. Next is nous sommes, then vous êtes, and last but not least, ils, elles sont. So if you don't remember avoir and être, this might be really hard for you. So make sure that if you don't remember those verbs that you're studying up on them, so that way you can do this without any problems. So just like passé composé with avoir, our first step is always going to be this helping verb, or this auxiliaire, this auxiliary. Our second step is going to stay the same with those past participles. However, it's a little bit different. With the passé composé with être, there are only certain verbs that go with the passé composé être. And they are all verbs that end up in this house that I like to call Dr. and Mrs. Vandertramp. So there's our little house. It's not the best drawing, but you get it. And so there are only 20 verbs that go with the passé composé être. And we'll talk about this later on, but in the meantime, I'm going to write this out for you. Dr. and Mrs. Vandertramp, DP, Doctor Practitioner. All right, so those are all the verbs that go with passé composé être, and we'll write all of those out here in just a little bit. All of these verbs will pretty much have the same endings, with er changing to accent aigu, ir changing to an I, and re changing to u. However, there are some irregulars that we'll talk about later on too. But for the most part, they'll all follow the same endings for those 3 groups of verbs. Now, with the passé composé être, I told you that there were 3 steps. We already have our helping verb, our auxiliaire. And then we have our past participles. So we're going to write all of these out later on. Our third step and our final step is the agreement. And agreement, not meaning yes, I agree with you, madame, but agreement meaning if something is feminine, so if something is feminine, you add an E onto the end. If something is feminine plural, adding ES. Or if something is masculine plural, adding an S. That's what I mean by agreement. All right, so let's go through and write out what all of these Dr. Mrs. Vandertramp verb DP are. All right, so I'm going to take away our notes here so we can talk about these irregular verbs. Now, I went through and I wrote out all of them. I wrote out all of the first initials. And we're going to go through and fill these out together and talk about which ones are irregular and which ones are nice and follow the rules. So the first verb that we're going to talk about up here is descendre. Descendre. That is the verb to go down, like to descend. So descendre is regular, and it follows that rule, descendu. So I'm also going to write out all of these past participles so you can see what they are and kind of see how they're formed. So descendre is nice and it follows the rule, so it's descendu. Descendu. Next verb that we have starts with R, and that is rentrer. Rentrer. Rentrer is nice because it follows that rule, and so the past participle is kind of sounds just the same. Rentrer. Rentrer. All right, next one is monter. Monter. Monter is the verb to go up. So monter is regular as well and follows that rule. Monter. Our next verb is rester. Rester. Rester is pretty easy to remember. Rester is the verb to stay. And rester follows that same rule. Rester. All right. Next one is sortir. Sortir. Sortir also follows that rule, so it's sorti. Sorti. All right. Now we're on to the Vandertramp part. This is our next big set of verbs. I'm going to move this up just so we can see the bottom of it. Our first verb for Vandertramp is venir. Venir, and that is the verb to come. You should remember this verb from when we did the passé récent, when we talked about the recent past, because you needed venir plus de plus an infinitive. Now, unfortunately, venir is our first irregular verb, so venir in the past participle is venu. Venu. I'll write those in a different color so that way we can remember them. Next is an A verb, and that is aller. Now, aller is actually going to play nice with us, and aller is regular. Normally in the present tense, aller is irregular. It doesn't follow that rule. But in the past tense, aller follows the rule and it plays along. So it's aller. Next one is naître. Naître. That is the verb to be born. Naître. So naître is the verb to be born, and naître is irregular. It is neigh in the past tense, like a horse. Neigh. All right. Next up is devenir. Devenir, the verb to become. So you could say to become a teacher or to become a banker, etc., etc. Now, the nice thing about devenir, even though it's an irregular verb, is that it has that stem venir. So any of the verbs, there's 3 of them that are going to have venir in it. Any of these verbs, once you remember venir and that conjugation, that past participle venu, you can figure out the past participle for pretty much any verb that has venir in it. So devenir, the verb to become, is going to become devenu, to become or became. All right, our next verb is entrer. Entrer, the verb to enter. Entrer is going to play along. It's going to be nice. It's going to stay entrer. All right, moving on down the list, we have revenir. Revenir, the verb to come back. So revenir again has venir as that part of that stem. So it's going to follow the same pattern as venir and devenir. So it's going to be revenu. Revenu. Next is the verb tomber. Tomber, the verb to fall. And tomber is going to follow our same rules. Tomber. Retourner is our next verb. Retourner. Retourner is the verb to return. Like I returned back to school, etc., etc. Retourner follows that pattern. Retourner. All right. Up next is the verb arriver. Arriver. Believe it or not, that's an A. Arriver. Make it a better A for you. Arriver, the verb to arrive. Arriver follows the same stem, so arriver with an accent aigu. Our next verb is an M verb. It is the verb mourir. Mourir, the verb to die. Mourir, the verb to die. Unfortunately, just like naître, the verb to be born, mourir is going to be irregular. It is mort with a T. All right. Our first P verb down here is partir. So partir, the verb to leave. Partir is regular and it is parti. All right, 2 more verbs. We can do it. Now, most teachers, when they teach you this, don't teach you about the verb décider, because you already are learning the verb mourir, the verb to die. So décider, it's not the verb to decide. Décider is actually the verb to be deceased. So I always tell kids there's a difference between mourir, which is the verb to die, as in you're being like murdered or it's an accident or things like that. Whereas décider is to die of like natural causes, like your old age or things like that. So décider I always say as like natural causes, and mourir down here is more of like a that wasn't planned. So décider, the verb to die. Décider, or to be deceased. This really means to be deceased. So décider is regular and it follows that same stem or that same pattern with all of the accent aigus in the whole world. And our last verb is passé. Passé, par. So passé is the verb to pass and par is by. So most of the time you'll see it as passé par, like I passed by something. And passé is regular. Passé. All right, so on here, we really only had 5 irregular verbs out of those 20. That's not bad. So the irregular verbs once more, venir, but if you remember venir, you can then conjugate devenir and revenir. So once you know how to conjugate this one, you know how to conjugate 3. And then we had mort and né. So né for naître, to be born, so born, and then mort for died. All right, so let's go through and see these verbs just very quickly to appease Madame's soul. So we have descendre, rentrer, monter, rester, sortir, venir, aller, naître, devenir, entrer, revenir, tomber, retourner, arriver, mourir, partir, décider, and passer par. So remember, décider is that verb to be deceased, and mourir is that verb to die. All right, let's do some examples now. All right, so examples. Let's take this sheet away, and we've got a whole blank canvas here. I'm going to bring back this for just 1 minute so you can see those steps and see how they're formed. And we're going to go through and do a couple examples using the 20 verbs that we just went through, using those Dr. Mrs. Vandertramp verbs. All right, so let's get our sheet of paper all ready to go and do some examples. So the first example that I want to talk about, let's say I was born. Let's say I was born. So I was born. And then we're going to make up a year, because Madame doesn't want to tell you how old she really is. So say I was born in 1879. Hopefully you don't think I was actually born that year, but we'll cross that bridge on another day. So the first thing that we need, you should remember, there are 3 steps to the passé composé être. So those 3 steps, we need être first, then your past participle, and then your agreement. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is bring our subject down with je. Now we need our être. We need our être, our verb. So we're going to say je suis. So je suis is going to be our être. And now we need the born part. And the born is going to be our past participle. Now remember, naître is irregular. So instead of it being né tu, it's going to be né. So je suis né. Now we need to decide if we need to make an agreement. If you are a boy, then you are not going to make an agreement. However, if you are a girl, and so I am a girl, so I'm going to make that agreement. So because I'm a girl, I'm just going to add another E onto the end here. So je suis né. And now we can finish our sentence. We can finish our sentence by saying je suis né en 1879. I was born in 1879. Right, let's do another example. So exemple numéro 2. Exemple 1, exemple 2. Let's say that he had become a teacher. He had become a teacher. He had become a teacher. So just like with passé composé avoir, we're going to bring our subject down first. So il. Now we need our être. So we need our être. Il est. Now we need the become part, or became. So in English, we don't really say he had become a teacher. We just say he became a teacher. But I'm writing it out so we can kind of see how the steps match up. So we need the became in English. That's the verb devenir. And devenir is irregular. So il est devenu. Il est devenu. And now we need teacher. Now you could really be very literal and say il est devenu un prof. But in French, we don't really talk like that. So we just say il est devenu prof. So he had become a teacher with prof. We could also say professeur, but Madame is feeling a little lazy today, so I'm going to abbreviate it. So il est devenu prof. Now, because we're talking about just one singular boy, we do not need to make an agreement. So we can skip that step and we are done. If I wanted to say that they had become a teacher, or they had become teachers, then I would need to put an S onto the end. All right, let's do exemple numéro 3. Exemple 3. Let's say they had passed by the school. So they passed by the school. They passed by the school. So to say they passed by the school, we're going to bring our subject down. I'm going to make this masculine. So ils. Now we need our être. So ils sont. Now we need our verb. Passé par is going to be our verb. Passé par. Now passé par is regular. It follows the rule of an er verb ending in e accent aigu. So ils sont passés par. And we can finish with l'école. Now, because this is plural, I need to make an agreement. Because it's plural, but it's masculine, I need to add an S onto the end. So, ils sont passés par l'école. They had passed by school. All right, let's do one final example, and then we'll end our video there for today. So I'm going to just kind of turn my paper so that way we don't have to waste another sheet of paper. And we're going to do exemple 4, last and final one. Let's say that they had gone down the stairs, like they had gone down. So they had, actually let's say they had fallen. They had fallen. And we're going to talk about girls. So I want to say feminine. So my they feminine is going to be elles. Now I need être, so elles sont. And then we're going to say the verb tomber. Tomber is regular, so tomber. But now I need to make my agreement. I need to make my verb agree with my subject. So my verb needs to agree with my subject. Now, because tomber is regular, it doesn't affect anything. So my agreement for feminine plural is es. Elles sont tombées. They had fallen. Hopefully, the passé composé être is not as scary as you first thought it was, but as long as you can remember those 3 steps, then you should be pretty good to go. Si vous avez des questions, if you have questions, envoyez-moi un email. Et c'est-tu et à plus.